The Korean War, a conflict that engulfed the Korean peninsula from 1950 to 1953, had its roots in the closing chapter of World War II. As the Japanese Empire crumbled, the Allied powers divided Korea at the 38th parallel. This division was meant to be temporary, a line drawn to facilitate the surrender of Japanese forces. However, it soon became a hardened border, separating Soviet-backed North Korea from US-supported South Korea. The Soviets installed Kim Il-sung, a communist leader in the north. The Americans supported Syngman Rhee, an anti-communist, in the south. The division of Korea, a nation with a shared history and culture, sowed the seeds of conflict. Both Kim Il-sung and Syngman Rhee harbored ambitions of unifying the peninsula under their respective ideologies. Border clashes and partisan activity became commonplace. The situation was further exacerbated by the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. Korea became a pawn in this global chess game, a proxy battleground for the two superpowers. By 1950, tensions on the Korean peninsula had reached a boiling point. The North Korean People's Army, equipped and trained by the Soviets, prepared for a full-scale invasion of the South. Kim Il-sung, believing that the South would fall quickly, sought and received Stalin's blessing for the attack. The United States, while providing military aid to South Korea, did not anticipate an invasion of this magnitude. This miscalculation would have profound consequences. On June 25, 1950, the Korean War began with a thunderous barrage of artillery fire. The North Korean People's Army launched a surprise attack across the 38th parallel, catching the South Korean and American forces completely off guard. The KPA, equipped with Soviet tanks and artillery, made rapid advances into South Korean territory. Seoul, the South Korean capital, fell to the Communists within days. The speed and ferocity of the North Korean invasion shocked the world. The United States, caught unprepared, scrambled to respond. President Harry Truman, fearing the spread of communism in Asia, committed American troops to the conflict. The United Nations Security Council, with the Soviet Union absent due to a boycott, condemned the invasion and authorized the formation of a UN force to repel the aggression. The initial response of the South Korean and American forces was chaotic and ineffective. Outnumbered and outgunned, they were forced into a series of desperate retreats. The KPA, with its superior firepower and motivated troops, seemed unstoppable. The fate of South Korea hung in the balance. By August 1950, the North Korean People's Army had pushed the UN forces to the southeastern tip of the Korean peninsula. Backed against the sea, the UN troops, under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, established a defensive line known as the Pusan Perimeter. This perimeter, centered around the port city of Pusan, became a desperate stand against the relentless communist advance. The Pusan Perimeter was a scene of intense fighting. The UN forces, reinforced by troops from various countries, fought tenaciously to hold their ground. The KPA, determined to drive the UN forces into the sea, launched wave after wave of attacks. The fighting was brutal and costly for both sides. Despite their numerical inferiority, the UN forces had several advantages. They had air superiority, which allowed them to bomb KPA positions and supply lines. The port of Pusan provided a vital lifeline for reinforcements and supplies. Most importantly, the UN troops were determined to hold on, knowing that the fate of South Korea rested on their shoulders. While the UN forces fought desperately to hold the Pusan Perimeter, General Douglas MacArthur planned a daring counteroffensive. His plan involved an amphibious landing at Inchon, a port city well behind enemy lines. The Inchon Landing, if successful, would cut off the KPA's supply lines and force them to retreat from the south. The Inchon Landing, carried out on September 15, 1950, was a brilliant success. The UN forces, spearheaded by the US Marines, overcame strong defenses and captured Inchon. The KPA, caught off guard, was forced to retreat in disarray. The tide of the war had turned. The Inchon Landing was a turning point in the Korean War. It not only liberated Seoul and much of South Korea but also shattered the myth of KPA invincibility. The UN forces, now on the offensive, pushed northward, crossing the 38th parallel and advancing deep into North Korean territory. Section 5. China enters the fray. A new phase of war. As the UN forces approached the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China, a new threat emerged. Mao Zedong, the communist leader of China, fearing an American invasion of his country, decided to intervene in the Korean War. In October 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops, under the banner of the People's Volunteer Army, crossed the Yalu River and entered the conflict. The entry of China into the Korean War dramatically altered the course of the conflict. The People's Volunteer Army, using guerrilla tactics and taking advantage of the harsh winter conditions, inflicted heavy casualties on the UN forces. The UN offensive stalled and they were forced to retreat southward. The war had entered a new and deadly phase. The Chinese intervention transformed the Korean War from a limited conflict to a major confrontation between communism and the West. It also dashed any hopes for a quick and decisive victory for the UN forces. The war was now bogged down in a bloody stalemate. Section 6. Deadlock, grinding battles, and stalemate. The entry of China into the Korean War led to a bloody stalemate. From 1951 to 1953, both sides fought a series of costly battles, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The fighting was characterized by trench warfare, artillery duels, and brutal hand-to-hand combat. One of the most fiercely contested areas was the Iron Triangle, a region in central Korea of strategic importance. The battles for the Iron Triangle were some of the bloodiest of the war, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Another key battleground was Heartbreak Ridge, where UN forces fought tenaciously to capture and hold key hills. The stalemate in Korea had a profound impact on the war. It led to a shift in U.S. strategy from seeking a decisive victory to containing the communist threat. It also highlighted the human cost of the war. As both sides suffered massive casualties, the stalemate dragged on, with neither side willing to back down. Section 7. Truce, the Armistice and Its Aftermath. By 1953, after 3 years of brutal fighting and millions of casualties, both sides in the Korean War were ready for peace. Negotiations for an armistice began in July 1951 at Panmunjom, a village in the demilitarized zone. The talks were long and arduous, marked by disagreements over prisoner exchange and the location of the military demarcation line. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed. The agreement ended the fighting and established the DMZ, a buffer zone between North and South Korea. The armistice also addressed the repatriation of prisoners of war. However, it did not resolve the fundamental issue of Korea's division. The armistice in Korea brought an end to the fighting, but it did not bring peace. The Korean peninsula remained divided, a stark reminder of the Cold War rivalry. The two Koreas, separated by a heavily fortified border, remained locked in a tense standoff, with occasional outbreaks of violence. Section 8. Scars of War, a Human and Political Toll. The Korean War, though often referred to as the Forgotten War, left an indelible scar on the Korean peninsula and the world. The war resulted in millions of casualties, both military and civilian. Korea, once a unified nation, was divided by an impenetrable border, its people separated by ideology and barbed wire. The human cost of the war was staggering. Millions of Koreans, both in the north and south, lost their lives. The war also left countless families torn apart, separated by the DMZ. The physical and psychological scars of the war ran deep, a constant reminder of the horrors that had transpired. Politically, the Korean War intensified the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. It also solidified the division of Korea, creating two separate states with diametrically opposed ideologies. The war had a profound impact on the domestic politics of both North and South Korea, shaping their respective political systems and foreign policies. Section 9. A Divided Legacy, Korea After the War. The Korean War, despite ending in an armistice, left a legacy of division and tension on the Korean peninsula. North and South Korea, once a unified nation, remained separated by a heavily fortified border, their citizens unable to cross freely. The two Koreas, shaped by the war and its aftermath, developed along vastly different trajectories. North Korea, under the rule of Kim Il-sung and his successors, became a reclusive and authoritarian state. It embraced a policy of self-reliance, known as juche, and poured its resources into developing its military, including nuclear weapons. South Korea, on the other hand, emerged as a vibrant democracy and an economic powerhouse. It forged strong ties with the United States and became a major player in the global economy. The DMZ, a stark reminder of the Korean War, became a symbol of the division of Korea and the Cold War. The two Koreas, despite occasional efforts at reconciliation, remained locked in a tense standoff, their futures uncertain. The Korean War, though seemingly a distant conflict, continues to cast a long shadow over the Korean peninsula and the world.